Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome and thank you for joining us for California Hispanic Chambers of Commerce's State of the Economy virtual forum in partnership with Comerica Bank. Before we begin, here are some housekeeping items. Please utilize the Q&A function on the bottom of your screen to submit questions with your name and your organization to the speakers and panelists if time permits. For individuals who are tuning in from a mobile device, please email your questions to info@cahcc.com. If you have any technical questions, please call 916-444-2221 or email info@cahcc.com. Please take time before our panel comes on stage to take a short 2-question poll. You can take the poll by clicking on the poll tab at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome California Hispanic Chambers of Commerce President and CEO, Julian Connetti.
Good morning, everyone. I'm excited to see all of you, and thank you for joining us for the CHEC and Comerica Bank for the State of the Economy Forum. As the leading regional Hispanic and ethnic business organization in the United States, we have been committed to bringing the issues and needs impacting Hispanic and small business to the forefront of both California and national economic agendas. Today's forum will feature speakers and panelists who will share their views on the current state of California's economy and how business, education, workforce development, and affordable housing are impacted, and how these sectors are important to a foundationally strong and growing economy. I encourage you to ask questions and be engaged in this important discussion. And again, thank you for joining us this morning. And please take the poll down at the bottom of the screen as we move forward. So thank you.
Please direct your attention to your screen for a message from Comerica Bank.
Businesses need more than encouraging words of support or hashtags of solidarity. Hope won't solve the economic challenges. Businesses need business. And that's what Comerica Bank is here to do. Lead business back. At Comerica, we're providing millions in resources to help drive business to our communities. To find out how Comerica can help your local business, visit comerica.com/business.
Okay, thanks, Julian. First, I want to thank the California Hispanic Chambers of Commerce and President and CEO Julian Connetti for the partnership. The CHCC represents the interest of over 800,000 Hispanic business owners in California and is the premier and largest regional ethnic business organization in the nation. And this event is in partnership with Comerica's California Hispanic Business Resource Group, which seeks to make Comerica the bank of choice in the Hispanic communities that we serve, and really every community that we serve. 2020 was a challenging year, really probably the most challenging year I've had in banking, emotionally, physically, et cetera, in every way. Every business in our market was impacted in some way, whether it was just about reevaluating their business in the market, looking at the way they were doing things and pivoting, all the way to businesses that really found it impossible to survive. Certainly every customer we have, as well as the bank itself, is reevaluating the best way to move forward and take advantage of the opening up of our economy and market. Personally, I could not be more excited about where I see things going this year and into next. I think the worst is behind us and better days are ahead. And I know I think that way, and that's what we hear from almost all the customers that we have. I think this year and next year will be providing great opportunities, and we want to take advantage of that and help our customers and communities take advantage of that. So let's get on with the program, and with that, I'll hand it back to you, Julian.
Thank you, Morgan, and thank you for your commitment to the CHEC and Comerica's commitment, of course. I'd like to introduce our moderator for this morning's event. Our moderator this morning is David C. Betancourt. David is a board member of the CHEC Foundation and serves as Comerica's External Affairs Manager for Southern California. David has proven himself as a leader throughout California through his engagements with organizations such as the CHEC. He has impressive knowledge of small business needs and issues impacting them that is equaled by very few. It gives me great pleasure to bring to the CHEC virtual stage, David C. Betancourt. David?
Well, hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. And of course, I can't get started without first thanking Julian and the entire staff there at the Chamber, Michelle, Alex, Laura, Edith, Oscar, Luis, Magali, Nora. We can never, have these type of events without your support, without your leadership. And of course, our California Market President, Morgan Rector, for the welcome remarks. I'm really excited. I can't tell you how excited I am for today's event. We have gone through one of the most challenging years I think any of us have ever experienced, whether it be the pandemic, the social injustice, and of course our hearts and our prayers go out to the family and friends of Dante Wright. But today, as it relates to California's economy, right, there is a positive outlook. And as we're slowly starting to reopen, as more and more people are getting vaccinated, and the governor announced California does have the lowest COVID-19 positivity rate in the country, right? So if that doesn't get you excited, then I'm sure after I introduce our panelists today, I know you will be. So let's go ahead and get to the introductions of our experts that we have online today. First, we have President of the University of Laverne, my alumni, Dr. Devora Lieberman. President Lieberman is the 18th and very first woman president of the university, which is a nationally ranked and Carnegie designated private, not-for-profit university and a proud Hispanic serving institution. As president, she demonstrates an unwavering commitment to the mission and vision of the university and constant dedication to the remarkable students and communities the university serves. Dr. Lieberman has also published books and articles in higher education on topics of intercultural communication, faculty development, diversity, and institutional transformation. President Lieberman, thank you for being here today, and Leos for life. Our second panelist is the lead research analyst for Stanford Latino Entrepreneurship Initiative, Marlene Orozco. So Marlene is a PhD candidate in sociology, the lead editor and co-author of the book Advancing U.S. Latino Entrepreneurship, a new national economic imperative, and has written academic publications in peer-reviewed journals in addition to several industry reports. And so if you're not impressed yet, this will impress you. Her research has been featured in over hundreds of media stories with coverage in Bloomberg, MarketWatch, Forbes, NBC News, Silicon Valley Business Journal, CNN Espanol, and Univision, among others. And Marlene's work is guided by her passion for education and economic equity and exploring pathways of mobility for immigrants, women, and diverse entrepreneurs. Marlene, thank you so much for being here today with us. Our next panelist is the Vice President of Engagement for Small Business Majority, Xiomara Peña. Xiomara drives Small Business Majority's external engagement efforts toward a more inclusive and equitable economy that directly benefits entrepreneurs in underserved communities. Alongside the small business engagement team, she works collaboratively on strengthening relationships with policymakers, small business owners, and organizations across the country to amplify our equity lens in all areas of our work. Xiomara has extensive experience supporting small businesses, particularly those run by people of color, women, and immigrants. She also has experience empowering at-risk youth and experience as a business owner, community organizer, and campaign manager. Xiomara serves on a variety of economic and workforce development advisory boards and committees, and listen to this, was selected as one of 10 leaders for LinkedIn's Top Voice in 2019 under the Entrepreneurship and Small Business category. So I think it's safe to say that she is a social media influencer at this point. Thank you, Xiomara, for being here. And then our final panelist is co-founder and California Community Builders, Robert Apodaca. Robert is co-founder and board member of California Community Builders, who advocates for closing the wealth gap among people of color through homeownership. Robert is currently the founder and president of Zezin Alliance, a firm that focuses on raising capital for developers, sourcing family development opportunities for regional and national clients, and public affairs for statewide ballot measures. Following his service as chairman and trustee of Alameda County Retirement Board, he joined the investment industry as a senior vice president and partner of Kennedy Associates, an institutional investor for pension funds. Additionally, he represents Kennedy Companies on Barings Private Equities Mexico Fund Board of Directors. So Robert, thank you so much for being here today. And now that we have more than enough credentials on why these panelists here are so influential in their respective fields, we're gonna go ahead and jump right into the questions. And Xiomara, I'm gonna kick this off with you. So our first question is, as California is on the trajectory to reopen, what trends are you seeing within your industry or field impacting economic development?
Thank you, David. And thank you again to the California Hispanic Chamber of Commerce for hosting this remarkable event, an important event to think about whether California is on track to recovering and whether our economy is going to continue to prosper and grow despite the very challenging year that we've had over the last year. Just a little bit of background, again, Xiomara Pena with Small Business Majority. Our organization is a national nonprofit, and we have also been doing recurring surveys of small business owners. More than 85,000 small business owners are in our network. And these surveys, while we typically, prior to the pandemic, really didn't rely on a whole lot of surveying of our own network, we really used that kind of information in order to inform the policy recommendations that we would be looking to put forward. I mean, to address your question, 1 year into the pandemic, many businesses are still struggling. However, a good indicator of the small business community and how they are doing right now in this moment, we know that the California Blueprint for a Stronger Economy has allowed for many spaces to reopen. However, that has not been uniform across the board with all types of businesses, right? So we still are in constant communication with folks that own, for example, kids' indoor playground spaces. And unfortunately, those types of businesses are still closed. Many businesses, while they have reopened, maybe are reopened at a very a much smaller capacity than they would be operating normally. And so as we see the economy improve, we really need to continue to think about what kind of policies, both at the federal and state level, do we need to continue to push forward so that we can stimulate our revenue base, for example, here in California. I think one important metric to measure, and it was really great to see those poll results come back. You know, our governor has said that by June 15th, we will be fully reopened. And with many small businesses, unfortunately, there is so much uncertainty that has arisen as a result of this last year with closures, reopening, more closures, reopening. And so while we look like the economy is on the rise, there's still a lot of uncertainty that small businesses have to deal with. The last thing that I wanted to mention is one thing that is important to understand about California's economy, and I'm sure Marlene and others will also jump in and elaborate on this a little bit more. But the pandemic did not affect everyone equally, right? And we know that, and we've seen the statistics and the studies that showcase that business owners owned by people of color, minorities, those businesses maybe are still in a process of I'll take one business owner shared, still in a process of rehabilitation, right? They've suffered a whole year of economic impact to their business. And so while they are reopened, they haven't fully recovered. And again, we have to look back at the policies that we need in order to ensure that California and small businesses are well equipped to recover to going back to the pre-pandemic levels, but also we seize the opportunity to really transform our systems to make it more equitable and inclusive moving forward.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And I'm starting to see too, like we're kind of making a transition now, right? From COVID relief to now officially recovering, right? And what does that look like? And there is a lot of work that still needs to be done. But let's stay on the topic of small business. So I'm going to jump over to Marlene. With the research you've done, I'm going to ask you the same type of question. As California is on the trajectory to reopen, what trends are you seeing within your industry impacting economic development?
Great. Thank you, David, and thank you, California Hispanic Chambers of Commerce and Comerica for hosting this event today. Certainly from where I sit leading our research efforts at the Stanford Latino Entrepreneurship Initiative, we've had our pulse on the ongoing impact of COVID-19 on Latino-owned businesses. We administered our first pulse survey at the end of March, just 2 weeks after the World Health Organization declared COVID-19 a global pandemic. And then we resurveyed that same group of entrepreneurs again in June and once more in September. Additionally, in the summer of last year, we collected our annual national survey of over 7,000 small business owners. And I want to note here that within that sample, we also worked very closely with the California Hispanic Chambers of Commerce, and we had over 200 members take that survey. So I want to extend my appreciation, since data are really really important and key for decision makers in terms of understanding needs and allocating resources. So now, as we're all here today, continuing to consider pathways for rebuilding California amid COVID-19, Latino-owned businesses certainly play a distinguished role in economic recovery. And as many of you know, Latinos represent the fastest growing segment of the small business ecosystem, with the number of Latino-owned businesses growing 34% over the last 10 years, compared to just 1% for all other groups. And I do want to note, and Xiomara started to highlight some of this, that the segments that have been hardest hit will also require additional focus and targeted attention. Certainly, most industries have been impacted in quite distinct ways. And for Latinos in particular, Latinos over-index in the accommodation and food services sector, which includes restaurants. And this sector has been one of the hardest hit. In the summer of last year, 1 in 4 Latino business owners experienced closure, and Yelp released a local economic report, and they found that for restaurants in particular, these temporary closures are too often becoming permanent. And so we also found that a greater share of Latinas were reporting large negative impacts as a result of the pandemic, with 41% of Latina-owned businesses being impacted to this degree. The negative operational impacts that Latinas experienced, beyond closures, they were experiencing missed scheduled payments such as rent, utilities, and payroll at twice the rate of their male counterparts. And so it might take Latinas longer to recover. And this segmentation is certainly going to be important, again, as we continue to think about ways in which we can ameliorate the lingering effects of the pandemic. And lastly, I want to point to some shining lights for us to follow. Xiomara also talked about how the effects of the pandemic are not being felt equally. And I've been speaking with entrepreneurs who participate in executive education program at Stanford, the SLAY Education Scaling Program. These are entrepreneurs that have generated over $1 million in annual revenue. There's over 720 alumni generating a combined gross annual revenue of $4.0 billion. And in speaking to some of these entrepreneurs in a variety of focus groups, there's an overwhelming sense of resilience. And I know that one of the polls was about optimism, right? When we administered our survey last summer, an overwhelming 80% of Latino business owners indicated that they would likely recover from the effects of the pandemic. That optimism has slightly waned, but it hasn't moved in the opposite direction. And so in terms of shining lights, these entrepreneurs are sharing stories about how the pandemic has provided them time for pivoting. They're redirecting their sales, their business models from, being a B2B business, direct to business, to moving to B2C, direct to consumers. They're diversifying their clients. Some of them have been able to successfully tap into relief efforts like the Paycheck Protection Program, which is providing them a cash runway for improvements. We spoke to an entrepreneur who acquired a new building during the pandemic, and she wouldn't have been able to do so without this cash runway. We also see entrepreneurs building intentional relationships with local governments, having to work on task forces or accessing permits in a variety of ways. Folks are accelerating their automating processes within their businesses. And so there's many more of these positive trends that we can highlight. I do want to ensure that other panelists share kind of their industry reflections. So I'm looking forward to continuing the conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Marlene. And just a quick reminder again to everybody online, submit your questions in the Q&A chat. We will have some time after to answer those, but to your point, Marlene, there is a positive outlook, some trends that do look, like they're going in the right direction. With small businesses being, one of the leading sources for jobs, we need to have a skilled workforce, right, to fulfill those jobs, which leads me to our next panelist, President Lieberman. Same question, as California is reopening, what trends are you seeing in your industry?
Thank you very much, David. First of all, thank you for inviting the University of Laverne and for inviting me to be on this very, very prestigious, esteemed panel. The topic is something that every single industry must be facing and must be collaborating with the other industries. And thank you, Julian, for hosting this, Comerica Bank and the Hispanic Chambers. On behalf of the University of Laverne, let me just say how honored I am. And David, let me say how proud I am of you as a phenomenal alumnus, Leo for Life of the University of Laverne. So as you asked the question about trends that we see in our industries, I'm very much going to reflect a lot of what Marlene and Xiomara both said, but from an educational perspective and how important this is. So first of all, for those of you in 1 minute who don't know of the University of Laverne or know almost very little about it, we're located 30 miles east of Los Angeles. We're 130 years old, founded in 1891. We're private, not-for-profit, as David said, a comprehensive institution serving 8,000 students. And what I am the most proud of today is 50% of our students, at least 50%, a little over, of our 8,000 students are Latino. 60% of our students are the first in their families to go to college. Our students are the future leaders of this region, of this state, of this country, and they will be global leaders. So I'm at the University of Laverne because of our demographics, our values, and who we serve, and the potential for what our students are going to do. Just an example, because we talked about economic impact, this year we gave $55 million from our base budget for scholarships to our students so that they don't graduate with the debt that everybody's talking about. And it's a big lift to give $55 million from a smaller private not-for-profit, but that's what we have to do. And the last thing, just related to what we're talking about in higher education in the University of Laverne, this year, US News and World Report ranked, they have a new category called social mobility, very much related to what we're talking about today, and that is going on and being socially mobile, upwardly mobile, and getting good jobs and enhancing your entire community economically and socially. And the University of Laverne in the entire country, 5,000 institutions, was ranked 5th in the country for social mobility, the #1 private institution. Very, very much related to our demographics and what we're talking about today. So David, in answer to your specific question, the trends I'm seeing in higher education during this pandemic, and thank goodness we're getting through the pandemic, and we're seeing light at the end of the tunnel. We're all very optimistic. But what did I see with our population? Well, first I saw that, as Marlene and Xiomara both pointed out, our population, the African-American students, the Latino students at the University of Laverne, were disproportionately impacted because of the pandemic for all the reasons that you raised. But what does that mean for the future of our students coming to a university, a community college, a CSU, as UC, or a private institution like Laverne? For many of our students, they're saying, I can't afford to go to school, or I have to delay going to college. That is going to hurt us if that truly becomes a reality. One of the things that I saw upfront and personal is, because of the pandemic, many of the high schools could not provide the counseling that the senior students and the junior students needed to be able to encourage them to go on to college, to understand that they had all of these options, and specifically how to apply for state and federal scholarship aid through something we call FAFSA. And because they didn't have all of the guidance that they may have needed, many students said, I'm going to opt out because I don't know exactly where I can go, how I can go, or how I can afford to go. Access and opportunity seemed more elusive than ever before. We have to turn that around. One of the things that the University of Laverne is doing is we're going to all the local high schools, and we are offering additional college counseling and how to fill out the FAFSA. And finally, as we look forward to getting through the pandemic, what do we need to do? We know that education is the greatest equalizer that we have, that it will give you a seat at the table because you'll have this degree. As institutions of higher education, we must listen to our community and identify what are the most needed professions for the next 10, 20, and 30 years. And we as institutions, we have to provide those degrees so that when the students graduate, they can go back to their communities and be active, civically engaged professional members of the greater community in areas like STEM, teaching, health professions, cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, supply chain, all of the things that our communities tell us we need. We have to work together with our communities to meet those needs with our graduates. Thank you, David.
Thank you, President Lieberman, and just thank you for your leadership and for all the resources you're providing to the students. And I think what I really am hearing is that the university is adapting to the needs of the community, right? And what the current trends are and what the new curriculums need to look like, for these new jobs that are coming out. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
For our last panelist, we're going to speak about another very critical topic, especially in California, as we speak about housing. Robert, same question. As California is beginning to reopen, what trends are you seeing in the housing industry? Oh, you're on mute, Robert.
Thank you, David. And I also want to thank Comerica Bank for sponsoring today's event. Thank you very much. It's very much needed for all the business people to be in tune with these evolving trends. And I also want to thank the California Hispanic Chambers of Commerce for being such a great leader in this state. So I have some good news. Not a lot of good news when it comes to the housing. And then I also have some bad news that I just feel compelled that I have to share with you. But no offense to President Lieberman in terms of coming from a university, but what I want to focus on is what Father Guido Sarducci from many years ago, when he used to appear in Saturday Night Live, he says, the only thing you have to remember about economics 101 is supply and demand, supply and demand. He says, I don't know why they have economic degrees and all these economic courses. You just have to know one thing, supply and demand. And of course, one of my other favorite ones was, because I was in the financial services industry for such a long time, is that markets go up and markets go down. Those two principles in economics, you got it down. So as it relates to housing, one of the biggest problems in California is that we have an imbalance in terms of the demand and supply of housing. And 2 years ago, when Governor Newsom came on, he said, we need to build 3.5 million homes, apartments and homes, in order to get back to an equilibrium. Well, noble goal for sure. That would mean that you'd have to build 500,000 homes and apartments per year. And we're not even close to that. The most, since he's been governor, and this is not a knock on him because there's a lot of reasons and explanations for why they haven't been doing that. But we've been averaging only about maybe 110, 115. And last year is probably less. Those figures are not out right now, but I'm sure it's going to be a lot less. So that's terrible. In the last 5 years, the state has only built, the increase in housing production has only been 1.7%. That's a 5-year annualized rate of increase and new production in homes, and that is the problem. And so as a result of that, because there's such a short supply, the median cost home in California is now, and as of 2020, let me look at my note. 2020 was $659,000, and what that means, based on the income of Latinos, only 20% of Latinos can afford to buy a medium price home in California, compared to white non-Hispanics of 38%. And if you're African American, only 19% can afford to do that. It gets worse in some counties, like in the county of San Francisco, where the median price home is 1.6 million. There's not very many people at all that can afford that. So that's part of the bad news. The good news, though, is that since the last economic crisis, we've had so many of them here in the last 3 years, Latinos have been the primary home buyers, the new home buyers in California. And just recently, NAREP did a study, and they will be releasing it. But what we find is that I wouldn't say the majority, but I would say half of the home buyers, Latino home buyers last year, were people who were under the age of 30, which is pretty amazing. And those were individuals who were either blue collar workers, not many college educated people, because unfortunately, if you came out of college, you have all those loans to pay off, and that's the reason you don't have the down payment. But anyway, so there's good news, is that the Latinos are leading every other ethnic group in California in terms of home buying. So the good news is that as of 3 years ago, I guess it is, there's a new law that enables homeowners to either convert the garage into a livable unit or add to do a standalone, what's the technical word is accessory dwelling unit. We call them casitas. Some people call them in-law units. But this law is enabling people to take care of their families. This law is enabling people who are they have a lot of equity in their home, but have struggling with income. They can actually build a casita and then rent it out either to family or rent it out to somebody else, and that can be a great source of income for them. The significance of this is that we, through our organization that I'm affiliated with called Casita Coalition, which was responsible for getting all this legislation passed, and now we're educating homeowners in cities and all these builders about this new law. We believe that over the next 20, 30 years, for sure, California will have over 2 million casitas. So just in the first 3 years, with no advertising, no information, you had to discover it on your own. Over 20,000 permits were taken out to build ADUs in California, and those people who submitted applications for those permits spanned the whole income group. So it was just not really wealthy individuals. There are a lot of low-income folks who own their home that are turning to converting their garage, which is something that I think it's going to be appealing to a lot of Latino families who need to take care of their families and during this difficult time. So, but the good news is that in the city of Los Angeles last year, 40% of all building permits that were issued by the city were issued for an ADU. That is a significant number. And similarly in San Jose, it was 38%. So it has taken off because there's less housing starts. People are focusing on ADUs. It does not require any kind of government subsidy, and it's putting a lot of great builders, which is a lot of members of the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, keeping them very busy. So that's really great news. Going back to some bad news, because I'm really involved in lobbying on behalf of home ownership in Sacramento. We're faced with another year where I think there's not going to be any really significant legislation that's going to enable more production of housing. That's the bad news, because here again, back to Father Sarducci, so long as the demand is greater than supply, prices is going to go up, and that we're going in that direction. And then the last thing, also on kind of bad news, not so much, well, it's housing, the cost of operating your home. Residential energy prices will be going up significantly over the next few years. We've already seen how utility rates are out of control. I don't know if you folks know, but PG&E customers pay 80% more in utility rates than the rest of the country. And similarly with Edison, Southern California Edison, they pay 40% more than the rest of the country. And that's a problem. And because energy is, right next to the mortgage, it's probably the next biggest operating expense. So we need to address that. And then also, and part of the problem is that the state wants to ban natural gas. So all those restaurants, they're going to be in deep trouble at the point that's banned, unless they adopt to the new method of cooking. But as you know, people have a hard time, warming their tortillas on an electric stove. So it's a real problem. Anyway, I think I'll leave it at that, and we can go on to the next question, David.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Robert. You bring up a lot of great points. Supply is a lot lower right now than demand. As you mentioned, ADUs are becoming more popular, a way to take care of family, bring in maybe additional income. I know also, I think DACA recipients are not eligible for FHA loans, right? As we talk about home ownership and other programs out there to help more people get buy their first home. So we're actually going to stick on the topic of home ownership for the next question. So what exactly does recovery mean for you in this industry?
Is that directed at me, David?
Yes, Robert, yes.
Yeah, well, so here again, because there's a lack of production, we're going to see rents go up. So in terms of the private sector, what I've learned is that rents were falling dramatically last year during COVID, and we're still technically in the COVID period, but they started to stabilize in about August of last year, 2020. So they're creeping up, not back to the rates previous to 2020. So that's and here's the other thing too. Latinos are not heavily invested in the stock market. So their retirement a lot of times depends on their rentals, and so they're struggling. So thank God for the forbearance. People are addressing their mortgages that way. Thank God for the moratorium. can't be evicted and can't be rent increases. Thank God for all that. But unfortunately, those forgivenesses and those opportunities are going to end this year. And so individuals with homes have to have an exit strategy. And unfortunately, right now, there's just not a lot of activity in the real estate market. So there's also a lack of supply of resales. And so already people are telling me in the real estate brokerage industry that a lot of the offices are not at capacity like they used to be, and only their top producers are making the transactions. And so we're at a point where there's just going to be a lack of resale supply, and that's going to affect a lot of people who are real estate brokers. They may be forced out of the industry for a couple of years. So that's not good. And then as it relates to home prices, so long as interest rates remain low, they're likely to remain low, for at least another, 18, 24 months. But that's very helpful. But because there's such a lack of supply for a lot of our folks who depend on down payment assistance, it's very challenging to compete with somebody who comes in with an all cash transaction, or someone who can close within 30 days. So that presents a real challenge for a lot of our folks. And but like I said, I think the bright spot of as we're coming out of this, the economy is coming back, we're going to see just a lot more people turning to ADUs as a way of helping individuals. The other thing that we're going to see is that we're going to see a lot more kind of gentle density. I call it gentle density because, I live in a very urban area where my building, as an example, is 7 stories, but, just in the last 2 years, 350 units were built across the street from me. So that's like a 6-story building. And anyway, but the good news is that we're going to see more, call it densification in neighborhoods, because they're now changing the law where the single family home zoning is being relaxed, and we're going to see more duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes. We've seen they're making those changes in the city of Sacramento, Berkeley of all places, and I say Berkeley of all places, which is next door to me. They are making the bold decision to change their zoning to allow for more supply of homes, and maybe some of those duplexes could be home ownership opportunities as well. But what we're going to see also, there's just a lot of excess retail product, a lot of strip malls that might be totally raised, and then they'll build housing above retail, which is a concept that's now being more widely accepted a lot. And then in other communities where you have a lot of big boxes, Sears, all those retailers that have gone bust, those are great buildings, and potentially they could be converted into housing, and that'll relieve part of the pain that we're experiencing.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Robert. So shifting gears, let's go back to small business. We're going to go with Marlene first. Marlene, what does recovery mean for the small businesses?
Great, yeah. So again, from where I sit, in many ways, the challenges that Latino business owners face, they've certainly been exacerbated by the pandemic. Historical gaps of lack of access to capital within Latino communities, have really come to the forefront in terms of dispersing funds to attend to immediate relief needs as it relates to the pandemic. And at the federal level, we've had the Paycheck Protection Program, the PPP, that temporarily kept many small businesses afloat. Of course, it's subsequently been renewed, and I think it's set to expire this next month, and there's still funds available. So, certainly that is an outlet for relief aid. And in all of this work, community development financial institutions, CDFIs, they've really played an outsized role in terms of connecting these funds to communities that need them the most. Latinos were still half as likely to access PPP funds relative to their white counterparts. So for us, in terms of lessons learned, we certainly see CDFIs and other financing institutions that are proactively reaching out to these growing segments of the small business ecosystem. In times of prosperity, they will have the roadmap and the community ties during times of economic downturn. And if we consider the most recent downturn, the Great Recession of 2007 to 2009, and the subsequent recovery that happened there actually would have been fewer businesses in 2012 compared to 2007 were it not for Latinos starting businesses. So for us, tracking recovery means returning to some of these pre-pandemic trends that we were observing. For example, Latinos are not just starting businesses at a faster rate than other groups, they were also experiencing growth in virtually all industries. And oftentimes I think misconceptions might lead one to think about a Latino business owner being in a particular industry, and that's certainly not the case. We were also seeing important revenue growth. And although Latino business owners or Latino-owned businesses generate less revenue on average than their white counterparts, 1.3 million annually compared to 2.5 million for white-owned businesses, they were showing important revenue growth. In particular, in our last survey, we looked at compound annual growth rates, which are known as CAGR, over a 2-year period, again, before the pandemic. And Latino-owned businesses were growing their CAGR at 25% compared to 19% for white-owned businesses. And this difference represents a statistical difference. And so again, in order to track recovery, we want to see kind of some of these trends return post-pandemic. And one of the ways that we've also found as mitigating the challenges of the pandemic is through the work of supportive business organizations. And in our work, we define a business ecosystem as a network of individuals and organizations that are working together towards a shared goal. And for some business ecosystems happen through happenstance. But for Latinos, this is being created through intentionality and the work of lead organizations. My hat's off to the California Hispanic Chambers of Commerce that are really kind of convening in important ways the work here in California. And as it relates to financing, we find that businesses that leverage organizational and personal networks, they're more likely to come into contact with capital providers. I'm seeing some activity happen in the chat, and I encourage others on the call to continue to engage with each other, because that's the important work that happens through organizations. So, again, our work has highlighted on this, on the important role that organizations have played in terms of synthesizing and distilling the ever-changing information that was happening as it relates to relief aid packages. So certainly, again, recovery won't be possible without the great work, the continued great work of these organizations.
Yes, I completely agree. And I think, we've seen a lot of organizations step up, right? We've seen CDFIs, the state, the federal government really step up and provide these resources. And I don't think there's ever been as much capital out there for small businesses than ever before, right? So that is a very positive thing. And Xiomara, I'm gonna transfer back to you just to, keep it on the small business. What are you seeing? What does recovery mean to you?
Yeah, I'll just, I want to touch on that last point around the federal relief. Over $1 trillion for small business relief at the federal level has been allocated. However, not all business owners have been able to access that. Taxpayers like ITIN holders, which also file taxes, until recently were not really provided an avenue to draw down those federal relief programs. And still, some instances or circumstances may minimize your ability to really access those resources. And so the concept of ensuring that business owners have avenues to connecting to their CDFIs or their ecosystem are absolutely important to recovery. And so let us understand $1 trillion, yes, has been allocated. However, investments continue to be needed to support those business owners that have not been supported. And so California's moved to invest over $2 billion in a grant program that rolled out starting in December of last year, and which will close its final round in the upcoming month. I think that those programs, and nationally, we're calling for a grant relief program as well, because we know that that's going to be critically important for business recovery. Business owners can't afford to draw down and overextend their credit. That can have significant impacts in the long term when we think about other things like, looking to draw down credit to boost their business or to grow their business, to purchase equipment, to hire folks, to have working capital. And some of the federal relief programs are very restrictive to survival. And so even if a business has been able to successfully pivot and recover, they might still need additional resources to move forward, right? I also want to mention, interestingly, California is experiencing a K-shaped recovery right now. And UCLA and others have looked at this. And one of the great reports was issued last month. I'll actually post it in the chat shortly. But when the recession had actually started, I mean, going back to last year in January, it was very optimistic. We had much to be happy about in California. Investments were being made in the governor's initial January 2020 budget, which had to be revised in May in order to account for potential significant economic losses. And so the state really did consider that we would have a significant deficit as a result of the pandemic. And interestingly enough, in December, the state found that those initial projections on our revenue were overly pessimistic. We, as of December, instead of seeing a drop in revenues, we actually saw a windfall of about $26 billion, driven by wealth increases and stable employment of higher income Californians. And so again, we've seen this shape, right? Some folks are doing well and they will continue to do great. Some folks have not had enough access to relief or those other stimulus programs that have really sustained ongoing economic, sustained our economy for some families. And again, there have been some great wins. The Golden State stimulus bill that was included in the recent allocation was also part of an attempt to support Latino families and others that were not necessarily a focal point in federal relief programs. As we think about recovery for small business, I think Marlene really did a great job indicating those metrics and those trends that we want to be looking at. We also want to be looking at employment. We know that many small businesses had to furlough, permanently lay off workers, and are struggling to bring back workers, or are not yet in a position to fully staff their small businesses. And this is a significant impact when we think about the workforce in general and what this means for employment. If you have businesses owned by people of color, statistically, research shows that those businesses tend to also hire members of the community that resemble them, whether it's women, whether it's other minority groups. And so if you have seen a permanent closure in businesses owned by people of color, that means job losses and decreases for community members are also being experienced. On the other hand, if you're seeing those businesses not yet fully being able to reopen to their pre-pandemic levels, while their revenues might be stabilizing, they're still maybe, having some hiring challenges. That's a huge indicator that we need to continue to look at in terms of understanding how small businesses are coping. And in our last survey, when we polled small business owners in our network, we found that this was a huge area of concern for small businesses in the coming 3 months. Some have been able to staff, some are still struggling to fully staff their small businesses, and we have to be mindful of what that means overall. One of the things that I also want to mention is California. I mean, we are, I see some of the questions here, I'm sure we'll address this, but in California, we have, 3.9 million businesses, about 1.6 million are minority owned. I also want to commend the California Hispanic Chamber of Commerce for their leadership as a co-sponsor of AB 915. These are some of the policies that moving forward as we think about long-term recovery that we will need in order to ensure that we are transforming our systems, right? Marlene and others have referenced the fact that the pandemic really helped clear away the fog around systemic barriers and challenges, whether it was in capital, whether it was in healthcare, whether it was in housing, whether it was in education. The pandemic really helped clear away the fog and demonstrate at the core some of the systemic barriers that exist. And so one of the things that I think over the last 7 months or so that organizations that are advocating for policy changes, both at the federal and state level, one of the things that we're really pushing for is transformative policy, right? Yes, we can meet the moment and meet the need of the today and the now, which we absolutely must. But if there is an opportunity for us to rethink how we distill capital to communities, not for a pandemic, but for years to come, that's ultimately going to place our small businesses in a position where they are able to succeed, grow, start. And so those are the things that we are also really, really interested in continuing to monitor as we think about the next year.
Thank you so much, Xiomara. And we have to work with all the components, right? We have to provide the capital, the technical assistance, but on your leadership too, in partnership with the Chamber on the policy side, right? And the more we all continue to work together and be as collaborative and inclusive as possible, the greater we can really achieve. And so I actually want to go to the next question to President Lieberman. Xiomara touched on workforce a little bit in what she talked about and how small businesses that couldn't retain jobs, ended up having to furlough or lay off their employment. But as we look to the future, as California looks beyond the pandemic, how can institutes of higher learning and community-based organizations contribute and drive workforce development?
David, that's a great question, a fantastic question. And I know we only have 5 minutes or so for each of our answers. I wish I had hours for this answer because it's such an important question. But to condense it, as I said earlier, the first thing we need to do is make sure that everybody understands that education, whether it's vocational, community college, four-year college, public or private, is the greatest equalizer that we can embrace as we move forward through the recovering economy and to lift everybody. So one, we have to all really embrace that principle that education is affordable, is accessible, and institutions, you have to have the right fit for the right student. And the University of Laverne, we serve these 8,000 students. 90% of our students come from this region. So we need to serve our students because investing in our institutions and our students is investing in the recovery and the growth in our region. The Public Policy Institute of California, this is, I think, critical to the core of what I'm talking about. The Public Policy Institute said that by 2030, if we don't invest more in education for accessibility and opportunity and affordability, if we don't do this, then by 2030, we will be short over 1 million employees in the workforce that we need, over 1 million. So when you think about this stool with 4 legs, you have the UCs, they're fantastic, the CSUs, fantastic, the community colleges, fantastic, and the private institutions. So you have 4 legs to this stool. If you take out any one leg, we will not be able to meet that need of graduating an additional, or we'll be short over 1 million employees. So how do we do that? Well, we need all four legs. We need to invest in all four legs: UCs, CSUs, community colleges, and private institutions. So as we invest in these four legs, remember, people always think that the privates are not affordable. That's not true. If you really look at a school like the University of Laverne, if the sticker price is on average $40,000 a year, that feels insurmountable. It feels like such an enormous amount of money for anybody. But our students on average pay $7,000 a year as an undergraduate student. Graduate students are a little bit different, but as undergraduate students, you graduate with less than $30,000 out of pocket. That's less than a new car. 52% of all graduate degrees in the state of California are 52% of all graduate degrees are earned through private institutions, and 28% of all undergraduate degrees are given by private institutions. Those four legs of the stool are absolutely critical as we move through the economic recovery and we build our workforce. The University of Laverne is a federally designated Hispanic serving institution, not just an Hispanic enrolling institution, not just an Hispanic serving, but in my language, an Hispanic thriving institution. As I said, 90% of our students come from this region. So our students are never seen as deficits in our community or our region. Our students are assets from our region who come to the University of Laverne or other institutions. They get skilled and into the most needed professions in our region, and then they go back to our region. We don't want the brain drain. We want the brain remain. I made up that phrase. We want the brain remain. So students coming from the region as assets, coming to one of the four legs of the stool, I think about the University of Laverne, so that they have the jobs most needed, or they have their career ready for the jobs most needed in our regions, returning back to the region and making the state of California that much better. So how do we get there? Well, we've got to get all of our students, we've got to get students back into the classroom as much as possible, face-to-face, hybrid, and virtual. We want to have our undergraduate students living on campus in the residence halls so that they have the whole experience. There was an enormous drop-off of international students. I don't want to get into the politics, but a lot of it had to do pre-pandemic with restrictions on international students being able to come to the United States. We have to turn that around so we can attract, welcome the international students. And we have to do this all safely. So coming back to the core, it is part of the brain remain for the state of California. All four legs of the stool are critical. And David, I believe that when we embrace education as education, the right institute for the right student, we will be partners with our communities. As I say, the University of Laverne is a private institution with a public mission. And that public mission is to serve our communities and graduate our students who are assets to our communities. Thank you.
Absolutely, and I couldn't agree more. Thank you so much again for your leadership, and I think we're all on board with, we need to bring our students back. I know Laverne has had a very successful hybrid model before. I participated in it myself, but we definitely need to bring students back on campus and give them that in-person experience. So before we head over to Q&A, we do have a special guest visiting us from Washington, D.C. So we're gonna let him speak before we go into Q&A. As a presidential appointee, Mark Al Madrid leads the Office of Entrepreneurial Development as Associate Administrator for the U.S. Small Business Administration. The Office of Entrepreneurial Development supports more than 1 million small businesses every year through a nationwide network of partners and resources. Previously, Mark served as CEO of Latino Business Action Network, a national 501c3 organization, and the Stanford Latino Entrepreneurship Initiative, which focuses on strengthening America through U.S. Latinx entrepreneurial research and a Latinx business scaling program at Stanford Graduate School of Business. From 2014 to 2017, Mark served as CEO of the Greater Austin Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. Prior to serving in nonprofit executive roles, he enjoyed a corporate executive banking career that began on Wall Street in 1995 with JP Morgan. With that, Mark, we are so glad to have you here today, and please tell us a little bit about the good news and what your vision is for the future.
Oh, thank you, David. Thank you, familia. It's great to see fellow panelists whom I admire. Marlene, it's great to see you, and everyone else here. And David, it's just been an honor seeing you just go on your trajectory. It is awesome. Congratulations, and to my esteemed panelists here. I'm energized to see familia. That's what you are. Thank you so much for your persistence. It has to start with gratitude, your persistence and your ganas and your endurance during what has been a very challenging series of months. And so I have to start that way. And I have to thank the CHCC, Jules and the team at the CHCC, the board, all the chambers and associations that make up the CHCC. I can tell you during the days at LBAN and SLAY that, and it continues today, the appreciation for this group, for this cluster that was interwoven into the fabric is something that is epic, and it's something that will not be forgotten as far as I'm concerned, no matter where we go. And so on behalf of Administrator Isabel Guzman, who is hit the ground running, working for all of us, certainly somebody who can call California home as I did. I'm just excited to serve under her demonstrated and bold leadership and vision. It's a vision of urgency. It's a vision of action. And that also parallels with our goals at the administration with President Biden and Vice President Harris. I can tell you that what we're doing at the SBA is building a more customer-centric, more equitable SBA. The SBA has never been in a position that it sits today. It's historic. We've had to step up as an agency, and we are doing that around the clock. We don't distinguish ourselves from working around the clock. Many of you are doing that as well. What I can tell you is that I share a sentiment with the administrator, and it is that we're connected to the ground. We want to meet you where you are, business owners. And that's why what you've seen during the first, not even 100 days, for me, it's been 60. For the administrator, it's been half of that. But you see developments in products and services that will increase the connection and make our services more equitable. When it comes to the PPP program, that acronym that has become part of our daily lives, the extension of the PPP program until the end of May. For those of you who are familiar with the Economic Injury Disaster Loan, EIDL, there's two portions of that in terms of opportunities. There's the grant side, which means you don't have to pay it back if you qualify. And then there's the loan side. And on the loan side, which is a very good working capital, if there's some LBAN strong familia in the house, you know about this product. But literally, this is a working capital option, which is amortized over 30 years at a low percentage rate, for most in the 3%. And so that cap for the EIDL loan has been raised from $150,000 to those who qualify for $500,000. That is a big jump in the EIDL loan for needs of working capital. And then you have our Restaurant Revitalization Fund under the American Rescue Plan, which is going to provide relief for so many of our restaurant owners. And I can tell you from the community that we serve and the community here in this room, we all know restaurant owners who have either shut down or those who are trying to survive. Some don't know we're going to be around next week or next month. So we look forward to making sure that you have that information and that it is readily available when that process opens. And then shuttered venues, which we had ambitions to launch that program last week, And we are in the process of making sure that that program is reinstituted and launched. And so we look forward to this group being a real-time update on anything related to shuttered venues. And when it comes to the Office of Entrepreneurial Development, we're the technical resource arm of the SBA. So this department is lucky and blessed and obligated to oversee the network of SBDCs, the Small Business Development Centers, the Women's Business Centers, or WBCs, and SCORE chapters. Also in our arena is the Office of Entrepreneurship Education, which houses the Emerging Leaders Program, the Ascent Program for Women Entrepreneurs, and the Online Learning Center. Pretty soon, we'll be launching a historic program under the auspices of this office called the Community Navigator Pilot. Navigation, as you know, is important to the administrator. It's an important word to the president. It's an important word to me and the team at the Office of Entrepreneurial Development. So we are launching a program. And a lot of us know about the promotoras and promotores that have served us well as community champions, bringing information down and connecting to the small business where they are, whether it be through Spanish language services and interpretation, whether you're going to reach somebody that is a disabled business owner or a veteran or a woman-owned business, or so many other factors of equity that is not reaching these folks. So we are going to make a granting application available to not only our resource partners, but also private nonprofits, states, state and local governments and tribes. It's a $100 billion granting opportunity combined. And so we look forward to that being another measure of how we connect to you all. And the last thing I would say is that we are dedicated to you. I can tell you what I've seen from the senior leadership team here is that we will stop at nothing, no matter what hour, no matter what day. What I think about is I think about you all. I'm connected to you for life, you know that. And I think about my dad, who I lost to COVID-19. I wouldn't be here, I wouldn't have this beautiful background. I take it so seriously, but for him providing a way for me and my family and owning that welding business for 4 decades. He died of COVID-19, I almost lost my mom too. So I think about him every day and what could have been if he had more access to capital, more access to resources, more access to people, more access to real-time information and updates. Sometimes just a 5-minute update could have been the difference between him selling welding equipment at the end of his life as opposed to managing franchises. And so we hope that we also are here to support you in different aspects of your trajectory as a small business, whether it's a nascent stage or a startup, whether it's somebody getting off the ground, somebody that's trying to grow, somebody that's sustaining, somebody who is scaling. And thank you for this opportunity to serve you and for being here. Thank you for the invitation, CHCC.
Thank you, Mark. I mean, always, thank you so much for your leadership, for your passion, for always bringing your energy. And I think I speak for everyone when I say that we are just extremely excited to see what great things are going to come out from the SBA with you and Isabel at the helm. We just know excellence is the only option. So thank you for that. And I wanted to say thank you to all of our panelists here today for sharing their insight. We're going to turn it over to Q&A. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to the CHCC studio to ask questions from the attendees.
With the Latino population in California continuing to grow and becoming an important part of California's economic engine, have Latino-owned businesses benefited from the recent federal and California stimulus efforts? Are we really seeing the benefit trickle down to these businesses?
Happy to start, David, if that's okay, and
yes, please.
Others can jump in. You know, one of the things that I think is important, I did also share this in the chat, or maybe perhaps in the Q&A function, but UCLA researchers did analyze PPP funding in California by congressional district. And interestingly, of the 14 majority Latino districts in California, none were in the quintile that received the most PPP dollars. Some of the congressional districts that they also looked at, like 44 and 40, home to cities such as Compton, Southgate, Huntington Park, Cudahy, were among the districts that received the least amount of PPP aid. Now, something that should be noted again, there have been significant modifications that the SBA has made in order to make this program more accessible. You know, one of the early things that the SBA did that we were very excited about was adding to the list of lender institutions that would be able to distill or to approve PPP loans. So Marlene mentioned the role of CDFIs. They also added fintech companies and some of those hybrid models that are like CDFI, but implement technology to be able to boost the number of loans that could be approved. And so that was a really important move by the SBA in terms of ensuring that those lenders that could provide, that had the trust with community, that were well equipped to also provide lending.
The only other thing, David, if I may add here, is it really depends on how you look at the data, right? And so there was a recent report that was released by the Urban Institute, and they looked at over 1 million businesses using Dun & Bradstreet data. And they found that small businesses overall, certainly while there was a general decline in revenue, small businesses remain in strong credit standing. And they note that businesses are keeping up with payments with help from the CARES Act, reduced payroll costs, and some flexibility from creditors. Now, of course, it's important to disaggregate data by groups. And so I already shared a little bit about kind of the impact of the pandemic as it relates to restaurants and Latinas in particular. And so in terms of relief aid, and Mark talked about very specific pieces of policy that are supporting shuttered venues and that are supporting restaurants. And so thinking about how to support businesses in a segmented way will be very key.
I'd like to add just a couple of things. And Marlene, just thank you for championing some very critical research on Latinx entrepreneurs across 50 states and Puerto Rico. And what the research from Stanford said is that Latinos were approved at half the rate as white-owned businesses under the first draw of PPP in 2020. There was a notable exception to that, where 82% of the companies that came through the Stanford scaling program secured PPP funding. And there are a lot of factors to that. It's not, as I've learned from Marlene, it's not a direct causal relationship, but what contributed to that was real-time support and connection. And I would like to submit for your consideration that that's what we give to our small business owners, because there was times, flashback to that PPP the first time, and there was instances where LBAN, along with our wonderful researchers, where we were delivering information faster than some of the financial partners. Like, we knew when portals were open before some of them did. And so, and we had a customer service attribute to us. So, it was our service also to let people know that was happening with those banks. So what that did is it provided a trusted advisor to these groups. And yes, some of them were definitely over $1 million, well over, but there were some who did not understand the breadth of services of the SBA. So that educational moment, that investment of time, that over communication, that getting subject matter experts on brief, digestible webinars, maybe there were 5 or 10 minutes. Doing strategic things like, enabling a thread of communication that applied to one update so that people could keep chiming in and you could track that. Those were instances that led to more connection to resources. That's what it's going to take when you're trying to get to the smallest of the small. In the restaurant revitalization fund, where we're coming down to the level and coming down only from size, is what I'm saying this, to food trucks that are on the streets. So it's going to take that commitment, and it's going to take that knowledge dissemination in real time.
Thank you. And with that, we'll go to the next question.
Newsom has said California will reopen, Governor Newsom has said California will reopen in June, and President Biden has said that we should be able to gather by July 4th. If there is an increase in COVID cases and we face a third shutdown, how do you see this impact the California economy?
Any of our panelists like to take a stab at that one?
Well, I will step up and say, and share the administration's viewpoint that we are doing everything possible to live out a priority of the administration under President Biden and Vice President Harris. And it starts with COVID-19, then the economy, of course, climate and racial equity. And so we are going to follow the science. You saw what happened with J&J, the vaccine, but there's a deployment of more vaccines on the Moderna and Pfizer front. And so it is absolutely, we will keep the priority of keeping the public safe. And so I will address it from a national viewpoint. And when it comes from the SBA side, is we've gone through, I give it to the career staff at the SBA who experienced more volume in 14 days than they did in 14 years. But it is incumbent upon us as senior leaders at the Small Business Administration to learn what went right, to keep on trying to influence technology in our systems, and to be flexible and adaptable to whatever circumstances arise from this point forward, because we're not out of the woods.
I'll just say from the small business perspective, one of the things that I think is important to, in some of the recent polling, and I shared this as well in the chat, but in some of the recent polling that we've been able to gather, there are significant, again, uncertainty. Uncertainty still is huge for small businesses, even though they're open, maybe operating at a limited capacity. Uncertainty of a potential other closure is high. And the thought of another closure could push some of those businesses into permanent closure. We don't have oftentimes we don't have specific bankruptcy trends from very micro small businesses. And that is because they might be operating as solopreneurs. They might not leverage the bankruptcy structure in order to make out whatever their business is experiencing at that moment. However, with another shutdown, I think that we'd have to look at state, county by county impacts, as well as the overall impact to the state. Again, we'd probably be looking at closures. We'd probably be looking at more need for federal and state relief if that were the case, in terms of supporting the economy and folks that have to be shuttered. I like to think optimistically that we are on the right trajectory based on where we're at in the blueprint for a safer economy, and based on where the vaccine rollout is in the state of California. Starting today, folks above 16 years old will be eligible to obtain a vaccine and make an appointment without regard to higher risk. And so I'll turn it over for others to chime in here.
David, can I just jump in quickly? I know we're
Yes.
almost out of time.
Please do.
So thinking about if there's another wave and we have to remain virtual or slower before opening up fully, and I'm speaking only about institutions of higher education and how we're going to react to this, we will, as Mark so beautifully stated, Mark Madrid, I can't wait to get to know you personally. You're phenomenal, as are the other panelists. But we have to do whatever it takes. There's no option. We have to do whatever it takes to serve all of our constituents in our region. So one thing that institutions of higher education, whether you're virtual, hybrid, or face-to-face, as we move through this, because we have to move through this, is we have to create opportunities to enhance our region, our small businesses, and in particular, our minority businesses. So one example of how to do this is we're creating a center called the Randall Center for Entrepreneurship, Innovation, and Social Impact. and it is going to be outwardly focused on the community, saying, how can we assist you in being more entrepreneurial, more innovative, and having social impact, so that our students and our faculty will be working with these community organizations, whether we're face-to-face or we're virtual. If there's an additional wave, we have to serve our communities. And so that Randall Lewis Center, Entrepreneurship, Innovation, Social Impact, is one small example of how institutions, irrespective of a wave or fully face-to-face, we have to continue to serve our small businesses and our economy.
Couldn't agree more, could not agree more. Do we have another question?
Lastly, for Mr. Robert Apodaca, AB 1090 has been introduced in the legislature. What is it and how do we see it impacting our economy?
AB 1090 is really the only home ownership bill that's been introduced in the legislature this year. And the idea is that California needs a master plan for home ownership for all Californians. So AB 1090 creates a legislative task force of 10 members, 5 assembly members, 5 senators, and then there's going to be an additional 11 housing advocates, ethnic chambers of commerce, and others to take a look at what are the impediments to home production and home buying, and then to come up with recommendations to overcome those impediments, but more importantly, to arrive at goals, actual goals, because right now, the legislators don't make a distinction between apartments and single family homes, or not all, they just call it housing. And when you talk to legislators, there's just a lack of awareness and a lack of appreciation that there's big disparities when it comes to home ownership. And so we want to make that part of the state dashboard, the home ownership rate, because California is ranked second in the country in terms of the lowest home ownership rate. And of course, Latinos are, lag whites significantly. So AB 1090 will now be a blueprint moving forward for home ownership opportunities.
Thank you, Robert. And with that, we're going to go ahead and close this out. Just again, I wanted to thank all of the prestigious panelists here today. Thank you so much for sharing your insight, sharing your expertise. And I know we can all agree that, although there's progress being made, there's still a lot of work to do. And as long as we continue working together, I know we can really make an impact. So with that, thank you. Thank you to all of our guests and our attendees for today. And with that, I'll turn it back to the CHCC studio.
Thank you for joining us for the California Hispanic Chambers of Commerce State of the Economy Virtual Forum in partnership with Comerica Bank. As the nation's leading regional Hispanic and ethnic business organization in the United States, the CHCC is committed to bringing the issues and needs impacting Hispanic and small businesses to the forefront of both California and national economic agendas. We would like to invite everyone to join us on Wednesday, May 5th, for our virtual California Policy Summit. Thank you and have a great day.